Assalamu alaikum. This is Professor Aminah Al-Deen, and we're continuing in our series on paying political attention. And today, with our trusty political science professor and our trusty attorney, we're going to look at some, I think they're really impinging issues. I took a moment and, everybody, well, not everybody, but some people want to say that this kind of movement of the Christian right is new, but it's not new. Some historians will say it goes back to the 18th century, even. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, and I wasn't going to look back that far. But I do know that in the 20th century, in the second half of the 20th century, we can say we have a concerted effort to put forth some ideals. Whether all of them are religious or not, we can debate. But I know that under President Eisenhower, for example, and we got "In God We Trust" on the money. And I was trying to figure out, does the president get to do that? And I guess he does. I don't know what they get to do and what they don't get to do. Then he turned around and we had a Pledge of Allegiance. And then he put "under God" in that. Then he turned around and began a serious expansion of the National Prayer Breakfast, which so expanded that luminaries from all over the world started attending. Democrats and Republicans are non aligned, so to speak. And you say, well, wait a minute. I thought the last real hit was with Jerry Falwell and his moral majority. And, I just remember sitting back saying, I'm not too sure that this is moral, but let me listen anyway. Now we have a kind of, again, a fracturing of Christian communities over how far to go. Do we want to give up the kind of moniker of separation of church and state? And us as ordinary citizens, what must we know about any of this? I mean, doesn't the Constitution separate church and state, or have people been misreading it all these years? Speak, gentlemen, speak.
Okay, I'll dive in right off the bat, even though I'm not the lawyer. But a lot of my research is on religion and politics, and I've done a lot of work on religion and politics in the United States. There's always been kind of competing views of the role of religion in politics, and the early Puritan founders thought that you had to have an established church. That was the only way you would have order and morality in society. But when it came to the founding of the Constitution, the founding of the nation, there was just so much religious plurality that if you were going to establish a church, well, whose church would it be? Right? It's going to be Presbyterian, it's going to be Anglican, it's going to be Catholic, it's going to be Unitarian, it's going to be Baptist. And essentially, the Constitution was an agreement to disagree. No one's going to have a privileged position. We're going to have a formal separation of church and state. There will be no established church, but there will be free exercise thereof. This is the First Amendment of the Constitution, and that's been the framework, differently interpreted over the years, but that's the framework that has guided American society. And in the 70s, there was a effort to really take prayer out of school, because prayer-led school would be essentially validating or endorsing an endorsement of one religion over against all others, and that did lead to a backlash of the religious right. Now, we can talk about Eisenhower if you want, but I would argue that the real changes happened first under Nixon and later under Reagan, and it's really taken off in the last since George W. Bush's era, and the Christian right is very mobilized, and even like the new visions of Christian nationalism, I would argue, are less Christian and they're more nationalist, and to that end, many people see them as idolatry. Because you're placing the nation as in a place of veneration and not.
Now, wait a minute. If Protestants have always made a claim that while the country was here, we are the people who formed the nation, right? And forming the nation, even though their principles and ideals were rudimentary, so to speak, that the nation is formed around those principles and ideals.
Well, again, also, keep in mind, like, which Protestantism are you talking about? I was raised in a liberal Protestant church, kind of a UCC and Unitarian, and in that tradition, it was just kind of what Reinhold Niebuhr comes out of. Part of faith is not knowing the truth and being critical of anybody who says that they speak for God's will, because if they do, then they're probably not telling you the truth. The other side of the ledger is the Jerry Falwells of the world, the evangelicals of the world, who claim to speak for God, and their policy preferences are somehow linked with divine purpose, whether that's tax cuts, large defense spendings, or the sale of AR-15s. And this is where you really do have a debate within the West or American Protestantism.
But isn't evangelical just supposed to mean that you get happy in church?
I'm away from that one.
Or God's spirit moves you, or something. I mean, I have a very common definition of evangelical, that it has become the adjective that it's become is new.
Yeah, and I have I'm feeling, Aminah, that you and I both have relatives in those communities, and anyway, but that's an academic perspective. I think we should hear a lawyer's perspective on some of these issues, because they really do kind of cut to what the society is.
Well, Aminah, I'll take issue that there's a merger between the church and the state, at least based on the Constitution and the interpretation. Oftentimes when we see some of these exclusions or exceptions, it really may be pre-existing policies that state. Like, there was a Supreme Court decision about a placing of a Christian flag on the City Hall in Boston. And the city fathers blocked it. It was appealed to the Supreme Court, and ultimately that person prevailed. And they prevailed not on some sort of recognition of Christianity being a having a favored position, but rather that the existing practices at that time of the Boston city government was to display flags of various groups, even surrounding events. So once again, it became more than separate church and state. It really became an equal protection, discrimination kind of case. So, I mean, we have to look at how these things are factually set. Nonetheless,
let's draw back a minute. Is there a nation on the planet that doesn't have a kind of country religion, a national flag, a national language?
Okay, so we were talking about this a little bit last time. Yes, there's always been a notion of what Robert Bellah has referred to as a civil religion. So American nationalism has always been infused with a sense of divine purpose and kind of a certain exceptionalism. We're different and ostensibly better, either because of our God-chosen status or our commitment to democracy or whatever. And that's part and parcel of American national identity. No two ways about it. The question has always been, is that kind of religious basis to the American national identity, or this notion of providential mission, is it distinctly Christian, or is it this amorphous Judeo-Christian heritage that can be inclusive of a wide divergence of peoples. And this gets back to kind of the famous line by Dwight Eisenhower that this country makes.
Be clear. I don't know Eisenhower any more than I know Reagan, but go ahead.
Okay. Well, no, Eisenhower said, this country makes no sense without a firm belief in God, and I don't care what that belief is. The idea being that you could be a Muslim, a Christian, a Jew, whatever. It's just you just have to believe in some kind of like higher purpose. You fast forward to the Christian nationalists today, and it's not, that's not at all what they're talking about. They're talking about a theocracy, kind of fusing religion and state, having the state regulate religious practice, having the state regulate, religious thought, giving preference to particular faith traditions at the expense of others. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but the whole Project 2025 that's been produced by the Heritage Foundation and is meant to be kind of the blueprint for a new Trump administration will enshrine in governments, many of the tenets of this Christian nationalist theology.
But wait a minute, Attorney Mitchell, what's wrong with this being a Christian nation?
Well, I mean, from a legal point of view, what you're trying to go at, I'm not certain. But clearly, a heritage. I mean, when you say one's religious background does influence one's thoughts in terms of it bleeding into your political views as well. I'm not saying and so when using that as a framework, yes, there's definitely going to be Christian influence in policy. Even I can recall cases and studied when I was in law school, where reference is made to Christian principles in a judge reaching a decision, but none. I mean that it is relied on. I think the real concern or the threat that Scott is referring to when you're trying to embed that into policy making as opposed to rationale for supporting the policy, then that's a dangerous line, because then that is, as opposed to being a point of influence, it becomes a criteria for decision, and that's the danger to all other faith traditions.
But isn't that already there? I mean, when we have discussions over the death penalty or prison reform, aren't they all based in Christian moral thought?
Well,
somehow.
I might approach this slightly differently. I think, Abdullah is really kind of getting at the heart of the matter here. The concern is if you link, at the end of the day, all politics is informed by some value structure. Right? You get your values from somewhere, and that's okay, right? It's whether you draw that from your faith tradition, that's fine. But when you start linking civil rights and civil status to religious identity, now you got the basis for institutional discrimination, and this is the real challenge. The founding fathers were adamantly opposed to religious tests to hold public office, and as I read through the Project 2025 narrative that was being produced by the Heritage Foundation, this is where I see it going. And this is really antithetical to what the founding fathers, envisioned. But the interesting twist is, of course, the Christian nationalists say that we're restoring the founding fathers' original vision. And that's, there's a certain amount of duplicity there.
Hmm.
I mean, and Scott, I feel those comments really lie into the crux of this whole series, political communication. To what extent, like I say, you're elevating these, let's say, principles or beliefs, how they influence you to actually, once again, they're become the rights and privileges and duties and responsibilities. And therein is the real challenge that we all face in as a country, as a
But
democracy.
are we already facing it? I can, if I chose to, wear a cross that covered my whole chest. If I put on a star and a crescent, I might run in some difficulty. You see what I'm saying? If I showed up to a meeting with a kufi on, hmm, everybody would turn around. Is there an insurrectionist on board, a seditionist? You know, and I mean the notion of a Judeo-Christian thing is relatively modern too, because Christians don't necessarily like Jews either.
And let's take it a step further. There was a moment in time where Protestants didn't really like Catholics very much either, and let alone the Lutherans, right? Lutherans are German, right?
Yeah.
So and you're kind of getting at one of what I see as one of the real challenges of American society is we have this vision of a plural, tolerant, inclusive, secular society that is accommodating to all walks of life, religious, whatever. But the reality is very different. And, I kind of feel like, during the Obama era, we talked a lot about this, about, striving to, to realize the vision that, that the promise of the society. And, the backlash to the Obama presidency, kind of brought out helped bring Trump to power, but also highlighted that, how far we are from, the reality of a truly open, pluralist society where, if you wear a hijab, no one's going to try to snatch it off your head. So.
But can you really ever have that utopian, free and open society where everybody can do whatever they want, whenever they want, however they want? What happens to the integrity that goes along with sovereignty of the nation? I have no clue what I'm talking about, guys.
Okay, sorry, I don't want to dominate.
Sounded good, didn't it?
One of the things that I always think about Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. And in the Gettysburg Address, he says, 7 years ago or whatever, we brought forth the nation so conceived, by the people for the people. Can a nation like this, really exist? Can it survive?
Mm-hmm.
And if you read it slightly differently, not so much, of a republic, but of a secular constitutional republic with a pluralist society, it raises the question, how viable, can this really exist? Or at some point in time, will the centrifugal forces pull the society apart? And my concern is that political leadership has historically been there to try to kind of restrain the extremist forces that are trying to pull us apart. But now we have a whole party which is all about fanning the flames of division as a way of riding that to power.
Yeah.
Attorney Mitchell, you got 2 cents, 5 cents to put in on this? I don't know if it could ever really exist.
Well, I mean, once again, I think it's how well we will hold to the ideals that are theoretically embedded in the Constitution. There will never that utopia in society that you refer to. I don't believe we will see that, and I don't think this government or this nation has been really structured for that. But we do have a framework where that by design is intended to have access to all faiths, all people of different persuasions and beliefs to have access to it. The problem will I think the real challenge for us as a society, will more of its people become involved? When in preparing for this, our gathering this afternoon, I did come across a study. I can't remember if it was by Gallup or, but I'm pretty sure it was with Gallup poll. And fundamentally, it identified that nearly 42% of the nation's people identify themselves as independent. They may be Republican leaning, Democrat leaning, but in essence, they're independent. Mm-hmm. So it's not as if the philosophy of the Democrats or the philosophy of the Republicans is the dominant view. It may be the loudest view, but to the extent that if you identify yourself as independent, if this vast this plurality of independent voters actually exercise their, whether it's in right to vote or their opportunity to speak and add to the public discourse, maybe we will see some that we can really serve as checks and balances. And I'm really, my personal belief is it has been the independents that have been the checks and balances that we've benefited from. And the question is, will they not become, as they call, the silent majority, but speak up and address these problems that we're discussing here this afternoon?
Well, I think, and I'm reading, and I'll invite both of you to read with me, Sherman Jackson's new book, The Islamic Secular. And one of the things he does is he goes back and looks at Durkheim, who you may not be familiar with, Attorney Mitchell, and Schleiermacher and Berger and some, in their push toward defining the secular as quintessentially non-religious, right? But when you come to trying to even write out something called civil rights, right? You're relying on morality that's coming from somewhere. And with that, I'm going to take a 2-minute break, and I want to just switch our conversation. It doesn't mean we have to leave it in total, but I want to switch our conversation to what's going on and what used to be a distinct land. No, it used to be a distinct set of countries, and now it's being melded into one called Greater Israel. This is Professor Aminah Al-Deen for Critical Talk, a program of sound vision. And we're still talking about we got to pay attention. We got to figure out what we don't know in this political communication. We'll be right back. And I don't know if I'm on yet. Ha. This is Professor Aminah Al-Deen, and we're continuing with our series on political communication with Professor Scott Hibbard and Attorney Mitchell. Um, I still want to come back to that, but I'm I'm beyond distressed. I'm in another hemisphere. I hear an echo. Huh. Um, about what's going on, and I don't know if I can even say that there is a Palestine left, that there is a Gaza, and talk about the West Bank seems fragile. Um, we heard sometime shortly after October 6th, I think it was the 6th, might have been the 5th,
7th.
7th.
Yeah.
I'm sure it started on the 4th. The beef up to, okay, now we're going to take it over. We have enough munitions. We have the right people on our side. People may say a little bit, but we're in all of the right places to shut them down. And that has happened. We've seen it in colleges and universities, in the workplace, even on the streets. And I had asked our producer to bring me up some maps. We had in our first talk shown what was Israel in 1948. And if I'm not mistaken, we kind of bumped it out to look at what happened after each successive um, conflict. Where are we now? Miriam, give me a map, would you? Oh, it's got to be much bigger than that, baby. Keep going. Okay. So, and they're still calling it Transjordan. I don't even know why they have Palestine under there. All right, this is what it was before, right? Where you had Syria to the north, Iraq to the east, and Jordan to the east. Where's Egypt? Egypt to the southwest. Where are we now? Hmm.
Yeah, I think if she scrolls, Marion, if you scroll down,
Keep going.
you'll
Oh,
kind of see how the borders have changed over
yeah,
time.
yeah.
And the '67 war is probably the most significant.
Look at that.
Just two comments to kind of set the context. One is, after the establishment of the state of Israel, there have been a series of wars that have led to the displacement of Palestinian populations. There have also been influx of members of the Jewish community from Iraq and Iran and other countries into Israel, and there's been a lot of population displacements. There are two populations there in this territory, and the question has always been, how do you resolve the tensions between the two? And, do you try to work it out through some kind of negotiated process, such as the Oslo peace process, fraught as it is, or do you try to resolve it through violence? And I think what you've seen is, historically, the Hamas faction of the Palestinian community and the Likud and settler movement side of the Israeli community have committed themselves to resolving this through violence. And in my opinion, that's violence just begets more violence.
Of course.
The second comment, and this is basically what we're seeing unfolding right now. The second comment I'll make is during the Trump era, there was a new diplomatic initiative to normalize relations between Israel, the state of Israel, and a number of the Arab neighbors, particularly the Gulf states, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, hopefully somewhere down the road, Saudi Arabia. The impetus behind that, or the idea behind that, was that Israel could have peace with its Arab neighbors without first resolving the Palestinian conflict. And so in some respects, it was turning the peace process on its head. And the assumption is if we can normalize relations with the neighbors, we can impose a settlement on the Palestinians.
Mm-hmm.
And that was basically the Netanyahu government's policy. And it assumed that it could continue the military occupation of the West Bank and the military blockade of the Gaza Strip. What October 7th highlighted was that was a flawed strategy. And now we've got all-out conflict again. And I don't know anybody who is happy about where this region is right now. And by the way, I spent some time this afternoon meeting with a Palestinian and an Israeli who are part of a community that have all had loss, and they find common ground in their shared grief. And it's a really powerful message that there is an alternative to violence if you just look at your shared humanity. But again, that's not where that's not where the mainstream Israel is, and that's certainly not where Hamas is.
Attorney Mitchell?
Addressing the premise about the formation, or at least this effort to normalize it as an effective strategy. I think the flaw in the strategy is that it did not really take consideration the Palestinians and the plight that Palestinians have continued to suffer under occupation. So it's one thing to say, okay, or we're okay with our neighbors, but even the normalized neighbors are not happy with what's happening in Gaza as well. It's put them in a difficult political position in terms of how do you maintain normalized relations when you see a significant population being decimated. And the tragedy of it all is that we're all lost in this political talk and ignoring the humanitarian tragedy that is occurring for this country, and to take a position that for 31,000, the loss of 31,000 lives is not sufficient to demand a stop to the violence. It is, in my mind, unethical, immoral. It's not rooted, and even the Christian nationalism ideals of how treatment of one man, of a fellow man to his fellow man, human being.
But you can't. If Netanyahu rather has decided, look, I've got the U.S. has equipped us. The U.S., and that's what I want to ask about, has put boots on the ground, which we swore we would never do. We've put boots on the ground. We've armed them to the teeth. Let's take the whole pie. I mean, Lebanon does Lebanon even have a government?
Yes, it does. So there's a couple of things going on here, Aminah. So first of all, the U.S. military is not fighting in the Gaza Strip. That's only the Israeli Defense Forces. We are providing weaponry, no two ways about it. For what it's worth, everything I've been hearing and I've been reading is there's a concerted effort by the Biden administration to rein in the Netanyahu invasion of Gaza. It highlights the fact that they may be our ally, but there's not altogether it's not altogether clear how much control the Biden administration has over Israel, and whether or not it's really willing to use its play hardball with Netanyahu and actually cut off military funding. But the second issue that you're really kind of getting at is there is a Lebanese government. It's very weak. The larger issue is Hezbollah. There is a militant organization and political party in southern Lebanon that is a dominant player in Lebanese politics. It's funded through by Iran, but it's become its own entity. And one of the precarious parts of this whole equation is Iran is backing Hezbollah, it's backing Hamas, has been backing Hamas. It's backing the Assad government in Syria, it's backing the Shia militias in Iraq, and it's also backing the Houthi rebels in Yemen. And the great fear is that this conflict in Gaza is going to spiral out into a wider war. And this has almost came to pass about 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, when some Iraqi militias attacked and killed American soldiers in Jordan. There was a subsequent retaliation, and that prompted a sit down between the Iranians and the U.S. Now, they weren't meeting face to face, as I understand it. They were meeting in separate rooms, but they were kind of drawing red lines, because I think it was in both countries' interest to rein in, the violence and not to let this war widen. But Netanyahu and the Hezbollah are playing with fire, and they're both provocative actions.
But what, in terms of how we, as everyday Americans, what are we to know about all of this? It has destroyed the sanctity of many universities.
Yeah.
Students no longer feel safe. Organizations no longer feel safe. There is no freedom of speech.
Well, yeah, it's true. I mean, we've replicated the Israeli-Palestinian conflict on America's campuses, and one of the challenges is, and this is what a comment that an Israeli or a commentator from the region made. We have the privilege of the disaffected or the unaffected. That we kind of look at it. We Americans here on American college campuses look at this as a football match, and we kind of cheer on one side or the other, because we're not the ones that are living through this. The people on the ground are going to be a little bit more restrained, but yeah, no, it's been very, very bitter, and the thing that breaks my heart is, I have students that will take off their keffiyehs when they go into the library because they don't want to be targeted, and by the same token, the Jewish students on campus are just really cognizant of their Jewishness, and so
Right.
like all these populations don't feel safe, and because of what's happening elsewhere.
So it's not like it's such a distance that we can, because of the polarization that it's causing, that we can afford to not know what's going on, to be able to separate fact from fiction. And I said boots on the ground because I heard of that American soldier who got killed, and if his boots weren't on the ground, he wouldn't have gotten killed.
So there are Americans serving in the IDF. That's
Well, we need to, for once, take our boots, polish them up, put them back in the closet, along with the various and assorted weapons we keep sending people.
it's an issue.
Well, I mean, if you, I think too, with the situation posed as Scott has shared with us right now, I think you paint that against the political climate within our country, when we can't agree about anything politically.
Right.
And so it is, on one level, we're even crippled in that particular regard.
Yeah.
I mean, you have a president that has historically, and Scott, correct me, but based on my anecdotal knowledge, is when the president is speaking in terms of foreign affairs, more particularly in times of war, everybody rallies around the president. I mean, I saw that deviated under the Obama administration and is in right form here under Biden's administration. We can't even get consensus on addressing some of these issues, except for Israel's right to defend itself. But the flip side of it, in terms of protecting human life, innocent civilians, it's been subordinated to this global plan, or let's say area plan, that is causing the destruction of a country, of the homeland of over 2 million people. So until we can draw on our moral background, regardless of our faith traditions, and see fit to begin to address this, we're going to continue to withdraw into our own polarized selves until the wind comes and affects us, and then we'll be hollering for help, but it'll be too late.
That's very interesting, because here again come the issues of church and state. If you talk about moral background, you can't talk about moral background unless you talk about religious, and kind of pushes. And I'll just say kind of pushes.
Yeah, and there's a strong Christian Zionist movement that's very pro-Israel. And I mean, my concern, and this kind of gets to the heart of our conversation over the past, whatever, a few weeks ago, as well as this one, is, for the most Americans, they don't follow this. I mean, it's on the nightly news, but they don't really know the dynamics. They don't really know the underlying issues. And members of Congress have historically been pro-Israeli because they just don't really. I mean, they're not that engaged. I mean, the senators in Iowa are interested in farming, and so trying to get a consensus on something, like should the U.S. intervene, or to what extent should the Biden administration lean on the Israelis? There's not a constituency within the U.S. for that. I think what's been different about the events of this year is that the younger generation is increasingly vocal, and it is engaged on the Israeli-Palestinian issue in favor of the Palestinian side, and that's a real sea change, within the American body politic. And I think we talked about this a little bit last time, and it very well may cause Biden the presidency.
It might.
Yeah.
And we're going to get to him in a little bit. I mean, in one of the next one, and we're going to take another little quick break while you gather your thoughts about Trump and his 2025. The dude has the nerve to have a 2025 plan, and he can't even pay the people he owes. This is Professor Aminah Al-Deen with Critical Talk. What must we know? This political communication, the issues that are affecting us. And I'm talking with Professor Scott Hibbard and attorney Abdullah Mitchell. Critical Talk is a production of Sound Vision, and we will be right back. Assalamu alaikum. This is Professor Aminah Al-Deen for Critical Talk, a production of Sound Vision. We're talking about what we must know, our political communication, taking a break from talking about the Christian right and Netanyahu and moving into more murky waters and talking about Trump. It's funny, but and I'll tell you later. You know that commercial. It wasn't a commercial. It was a cartoon on Function Junction, and they talking about what is a bill and
Schoolhouse Rock.
about how what is a bill. Never mind. Okay, you know, people are begin. Some people, not all people, are beginning to listen to Trump very closely. And if I'm not mistaken, there is now a a kind of leftist group. I don't like this left right progressive stuff, but a kind of a more reasonable group that's coming up against some of these right politics. Get rid of everybody, you know. Oh, I'm gonna build God hasn't seen a wall yet till I build this wall down at the border. Texas wants to what is that called? Succeed, which might be a
See,
good thing. That would be interesting. Matter of fact, um, he's going to shut down all of the welfare programs because people, need to go to work. So, given what Mr. Trump wants to do, what must we know?
so if you don't mind me starting out on this, so we were talking before about the Project 2025, and what's interesting about that is if you go back to the first Trump administration, they really did not have a plan for what to do on day one.
They didn't last time, or they 300 and something.
Well, that's the thing is they didn't. And there's actually a great book which I'll shamelessly plug. Well, actually, I don't know the guy, but it's Michael Lewis, and he wrote a book called The Fifth Risk, and it was called The Fifth Risk. It's by Michael Lewis. Michael Lewis has written a number of books, which I'm blanking on the names of all.
Oh, can you say that a little bit more slowly so that Miriam can capture?
Yes.
And put it on our scroll.
Yes. So it's Michael Lewis, and the book is called The Fifth Risk. And he wrote like Moneyball and The Big Short and a couple other books.
Okay, so, I know who that is.
But the Fifth Risk is basically he went around and interviewed all these people that work in the government, and they're part of what what Trump would refer to as the deep state. But they're technocrats. I mean, they're the ones that predict the weather. They're the ones that help manage the nuclear oversight programs of the Department of Energy. They're the ones that also are worried about what could go wrong in a catastrophic manner. Now the point is, he's talking to all these people in all these government agencies, and when the Trump administration took over, all the Obama administration political appointees had briefing books and were ready to meet with whoever the Trump people sent over, and the Trump people didn't send anyone over because they didn't have anyone, and they didn't have a plan. And they left many of these offices just empty and unfilled, and they didn't have a program. And it's one of the reasons why the early Trump administration was actually really ineffective, because they just didn't have a plan. The Project 2025 is meant to remedy that. It's being produced by the Heritage Foundation, and it's a very, very lengthy document, and it's basically what their plan is for day one. And what's really worrying is the connection between this project and the Heritage Foundation and Viktor Orban in Hungary, because they're basically modeling much of what Viktor Orban has done in Hungary. They're modeling it for here in the United States, and that's really disconcerting.
Let me ask a question, because when we get to issues like what must we know? What do those people do in Congress? I see, the Congress people, and then all these people lined up behind them that really look like they're working, and the Congress people looking like they're on holiday and they've just been called off. What are those people behind them doing?
I'll let Abdullah.
Besides texting.
I don't want that is much too rhetorical for me. I think the real
CIOGC and other Muslim organizations want to send Muslim students to whatever it is for people in the House of Representatives. What are you sending them to do?
Well, and once again, the purpose of that particular initiative you're referring to is to begin to educate young people on the political system, how our government operates, how laws and policies are made.
People,
you gave me the floor. Let me finish my point, then you can cut it. So, I mean, that is the objective. And I think the real challenge when you say who those people are, if you don't have enough people engaged, then it's a select few that are behind those representatives that reflect let's say a restrictive, more polarized points of view. So, I mean, really, I guess I'm kind of beating around the bush, but let me come to the head of the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is that it is very important for that we increase the number of people who are civically engaged. It's not, the reference I'll go back to is that the Gallup poll or study that was done where the predominant group are people who view themselves as independent. If these people do not think and speak and advocate for the principles that they hold dear, then it will once again, it'll be the loud few that dominate and set policy, because what is coming out this heritage project does not reflect the view of everybody in the United States.
Maybe we ought to look at them too in one of our what we must know. But who selects the people sitting behind the senators?
Okay, so I'll answer that because I was one of those people.
I know. That's why I'm waiting for you.
So both my wife and I worked on Capitol Hill. We were legislative staff members of different members of Congress and senators, and we're hired by the actual member of Congress, and it takes a long time to kind of work your way up through the food chain to get into a position where you're actually looking at policy. I strongly encourage it for all my students. We actually have a internship program. It sounds like similar to what CIOG has, and we send students out there in part because this is it's a great learning experience and also gets them engaged, and that is a stepping stone into into public policy. And if you're interested in working in public policy at the national level, that's a great vehicle for doing it. Just to kind of bring it back to Project 2025. Project 2025 is is run by the Heritage Foundation, which is a think tank, and that's a conservative think tank that has a very distinct partisan, not even a partisan, but very distinct ideological agenda. And a lot of what happens in Washington is a debate of ideas, and this is how the debate of ideas unfolds. And even if they do get elected, there's still a question of can you get this through legislation? And this goes back to Abdullah's point. If there's a good cadre of people that are engaged, working both as members of Congress and getting elected to Congress, but also working as legislative staff people, that's how you kind of promote your ideas as opposed to these more radical ideas.
So, what does Trump want to do now? He wants to get rid of most of the immigrants.
Well,
he wants all the Muslims at bay.
Yeah, part of what he wants to do in this project is fire a lot of the civil service so that political appointees will have greater control over the levers of power. And once you gain control of those levers of power, then you can start using the power of the bureaucracy or power of the government to round people up, deport people, crack down on the border.
So you mean the agencies to
Yes.
take over control of the agency?
Yes. Yes.
Does the president have control over the agencies now?
Well, so yes, but as a friend of mine once said, you always wondered a friend of mine who worked in the government agencies, he said, it wasn't altogether clear if you were running the institution or the inmates were running the asylum. Because it's like, there is a permanent bureaucracy that's there, and if you're trying to push through a radical agenda, they will slow walk it, which happened under the Trump administration.
Mm-hmm.
So what he wants to do is fire a lot of those people that are they're in the bureaucracies, and that will make it easier for the political appointees to control what actually is happening within the agency.
Can he actually do that?
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how it unfolds, because on the one hand, there are certain protections, in the civil service, but that's the goal, and again, this is part of what Viktor Orban did in Hungary.
So he can actually move to take over governance, which would then undermine democratic ideals, right?
Well, again, he would work through the process to disempower full-time or the permanent bureaucracy. In that way, give greater authority to the people that are being appointed, what we call Schedule C or political appointees. So it would give him, greater control over over the agencies.
Okay, you just gave me the fodder for our next convening. I think what we must know is the difference between the House and the Senate. What they do, how they do it, how they're supposed to be. I don't know if they're supposed to be a check and balance on one another. I've lost the whole idea of checks and balances because there doesn't seem to be any. But I think we're going to go there, and we're going to look at a little bit of time on some of these extraordinarily influential think tanks, like the Heritage Foundation. I want to thank both of you for indulging me this evening. You got my mind whirling. I don't like the fact that he can take over federal agencies. I did not read that. I probably skipped it. No, but I'm going to go back. That's horrible.
Well, so technically he is the president, so he was technically in charge, right?
He's supposed to go golfing or something. Really? It's almost as if we don't have these autonomous layers of stuff that can't be. I thought the Supreme Court was one. I gave up on that one. That can be affected by the nut that's in the presidency. Woo! We will come back. I want to thank both of you, Professor Scott Hibbard and Attorney Abdullah Mitchell, for indulging me in all my myriad questions, which will continue when we come back for Critical Talk and what we must know, this political communication in 2024, for what I pray is not a disaster in 2025. Thank both of you very much from Critical Talk and its producers, which are Sound Vision. This is Aminah Al-Deen, and I will see you next time.